and this is the Adam Messer Show. My name is Adam Messer. I'm your host, and my special guest today is a gentleman by the name of David Allen Voyles, who is an author and a professor. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam, it's great to be with you.
Thank you so much. And David, my son Sebastian plays live music with us every week. So, Sebastian, you mind playing a little bit? Here is Sebastian Messer, everybody. Awesome.
Nice.
Thanks, Bass. So, David, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I am a retired school teacher who turned to writing, but by way of first toying with having a ghost tour company. And I taught English, taught high school English for 30 years. And so literature's always been a thing, just always loved horror especially, but love all literature.
Mm-hmm.
But just had a lot of fun with that because most people do like a good scary story, so it was something that always worked into the curriculum. But when I retired, I've always liked Halloween, and my family's always had a real fun time at Halloween with making props and having kind of unique parties. And my grown son and I were chatting while we were all grilling. My wife was kind of in and out of the house, and we were toying with the idea after a particular Halloween themed party where we always have themes for our parties, and that happened to be a ghost tour. We said, wouldn't it be cool, because the party went so well and everybody loves a good ghost story, if we could have a business where you could like get a hearse and haul people around in it and tell them ghost stories and take them to haunted ghost sites.
Oh, wow.
And we laughed, and but as the night went on, we started thinking about how we could really do that. And before the evening was over, we said, let's look into it. And so we did that and ran that for 3 years, had dark ride tours. With taking people around in a 1972 Cadillac hearse.
That would have been a big hit here in Savannah because we have a lot of tour companies, and then also like a lot of scary stuff. They say Savannah's the most haunted city in the whole U.S. So I know
I have heard that.
I know a lot of especially older cities have different ghost stories and things like that. Especially with I don't know how to say it, but like turn of the century type stuff, the colonialism type stuff, like Savannah, being the first planned city in the U.S. I mean, they've got a long history of things, and so that tour company. I mean, I know you called your book "Tales from the Hearse," right?
Yeah, that's right. There's definitely a connection from doing the hearse ghost tours to writing the books. But we had we had two tours we basically did. We had a graveyard tour in Riverside Cemetery. By the way, I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, which a beautiful city in the mountains of North Carolina. Riverside Cemetery is a historic cemetery, really gorgeous, just beautiful place. We would take people through there. And then we had an evening tour that went along the French Broad River, more or less. You didn't see the river very much, but there were places, our sites were along the river, and the stories that we told were about those hauntings on the river. And it was just a lot of fun. So at Christmas time, in Yuletide season for the holidays, we switched things over and had a really special tour that was actually a tremendous amount of fun. And we, there's so much to go into that was fun with that. But after we closed down the tours, we decided it went real well, but it was like, we're at the point where we've either got to expand this, like get an additional vehicle, something that can even ride more people. We could take basically 6 people comfortably at a time, and that means another loan, or shut it down. And we just weren't willing to take the big risk again with more money. Kind of glad the way, coronavirus came and the destruction it's wrought. I don't know what would have happened if we'd actually tried to do it. So maybe that was all in the cards. But I took that down. But I thought, I've made up some good stories about Christmas and the holidays that people seem to like. I think I put together a unique collection of stories. So I wrote The 13th Day of Christmas. And there were 2 or 3 stories in that book were stories that I told on the tour, but, jazzed them up a little bit. And Also, the book is actually a little bit scarier than the stories that I could tell on a family-friendly tour. You
Right,
know,
right.
I didn't know what the ages were going to be of people that were riding with us on a given night. So, but with the book, I could, do what I wanted to, and that was a lot of fun. So I did that book for self-published, uh, and went through what every single writer that I know of anyway goes through as they try to do that themselves. It is really hard,
Oh
to
yeah,
get
yeah.
things
It's a lot of
noticed.
work.
A lot of work, and you're competing against so many people. I mean, that's the wonderful and the bad thing, the two-sided coin of the internet. It's giving everybody such a wonderful opportunity to publish, but it also gives everybody a wonderful opportunity to publish. So I mean,
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
got
I've said
all
the
the
same thing. Yeah, it's like the nice thing about the internet is everybody has access to it, and the nice thing about the internet is that everybody has access to it.
That is exactly it,
Yeah,
man. I mean, it
yeah.
really is. So you really need a little help. So it was really about a year ago. It was in July that I first published the 13th Day of Christmas. And that was 13 stories, by the way. The 13th one was a novella that is the title name of the book. The book takes its title from that novella. Um, and, but I met someone, and it really did help me out a whole lot. Probably around, I'm thinking it was November. It might have been October still. I guess it was October, but met Jason Stokes and his wife Anna Ray Stokes. They created or have created, they're owners and creators of a small publishing company dedicated to independent authors
Hmm.
called Gestalt Media. And a lot of what you ended up doing when you kind of just put things together and help authors, as you put some anthologies together and do different things. But they have been a tremendous help. And so right before Christmas, we were able to get a few things out there and, make a little bit of headway and make a splash to some degree. I'd call it a small splash. And then,
Yeah.
so then as things went on, I had still more stories and wanted to write more stories. So I put them together in a book that I just thought of as calling it Tales from the Hearse. Um,
I like the title. I think it's a great title. Yeah, Tales
yeah,
from the
the
Hearse.
introduction tells a little bit about like what I was just explaining there and a little bit about the stories. Ironically, I think there's only one story in the book that's based on something I told in the hearse, but they all have the feel of
Mm.
like something that somebody could tell you around a campfire, if not actually riding around in a hearse, since most people don't have that experience. But
Mm.
the idea, I heard you mentioning a little bit before in the last hour about storytelling and what's, just the power of storytelling. It's a really wonderful thing in my view.
I
And
agree. I
when I
love
was
it.
doing it's
And
just
I
so
love
cool.
that. And not to interrupt you there, but I love the
Go
fact that
ahead.
you were an English teacher. I when I was I was just mentioning that this interview with Tony Ray Morris kind of fell in my lap, and I did I did a podcast interview with it, and everybody listening, Tony Ray Morris is also an English professor, but he has a new book called Deep River Blues. And so he was an English professor. He is an English professor, like being an English teacher, professor, same difference to me, all the same. And we were talking about, the craft of storytelling, and I went back, and I'm going to say this to you too, because this is what I was talking to Tony. I had an English teacher in high school named Mr. Beach. He was my AP English professor, teacher, or whatever, for my senior year. We studied Hamlet. We studied Shakespeare. We studied the sonnets. We read Chaucer. We read a lot of different classics. But the thing that stuck with me is because as a kid, I was always into reading, writing, loving it or whatever. But as far as a teacher who loved what they were doing
Hmm.
and made those classics accessible and also relatable,
Yeah.
I feel like that is such a great way with storytelling, and it's not easy. It's not
Yeah.
easy, but when you feel connected with that author, or you feel connected with that story, you feel like you're part of that moment or that life or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the things with any good storyteller is that, you invite the reader to become part of that story. You invite the reader to live in that moment with you, as you're telling this, you're weaving this tale and telling them. And I can't describe a better feeling. I mean, like, there are a few things in my life that I can, relate to, that I feel like are on the same level. I don't feel like I don't really want to mention them on air, but there are only a few things in my life that I enjoy that much.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Well, I think that's really right. And I definitely go along with that sentiment. And it's one of the reasons why I knew I wanted to teach. I pretty much knew I wanted to teach even when I was in high school.
Oh,
I
wow.
wasn't a wonderful, well, I think I was a good human being, but I mean, I wasn't the perfect, do everything right kid necessarily. But I did want to teach. I thought school was really cool. I always liked English best because of the literature.
Yeah.
And so when it came time to teach, I thought, well, that's really what I want to do. And it seems like it's the way to reach out the most to people. And history's really cool too. I like history, and especially like it more as I've gotten older.
Mm-hmm.
But I think storytelling can be history, but it's just a very entertaining form of that. And then it can be totally creative with something else. But you get to explore areas in fiction that you don't get to explore necessarily in history.
Yeah, you can go to
Where science
Mars.
fiction science
in
fiction,
a book,
exactly.
and you'd
And so
never
you
go
can
to
put all
Mars in real
kinds of
life.
Yeah, but you can put ideas out there that are part of the human experience,
Mm-hmm.
explore things and how they might work. And so all of that has been really cool. And so in the classroom, that's what I wanted to do. But I always have had this special love of horror and Halloween. So I love to work that in because, like I say, most kids, that's really a lot of people's experience of hearing a story told. It's often a ghost story.
Yeah, ghost story. Yeah.
So ghost stories have just thrilled us. I think they've always been
Yeah.
around that way. So that experience to me in the hearse of doing the ghost tours, first of all, it was very intimate. It's even more intimate than a walking ghost tour because you had 6 people in the car, or
Mm-hmm.
frequently 4, sometimes just 2. And me, I was the storyteller. And I had a persona, I had a character that I was as their host, Virgil Nightshade.
Nice.
And I had a kind of an Undertaker kind of appeal. And my son, who's very tall, very built, this huge guy, was always silent, and he wore like the Grim Reaper outfit with this huge skeletal grin that was covering half of his face. So he was the driver, and he could also work our technology. We had wonderful things in the hearse. There was a TV so that
Wow.
we could, show little snippets of things, but also stream outside live. So we could pull up in the graveyard. We could get out. I got people out of the hearse, and they, and if somebody was still in the hearse, they could see you live on the screens at the graveyard. But I'd tell a story or whatever. We get back in the hearse. Well, because of the hookups and the technology we had, my son was able to figure all this out. We could make ghosts appear where you had just been standing, so
Wow.
ghosts could walk through the graveyard. And so we had so much fun with that. But it was such an intimate experience.
Right.
And what people often liked, in addition to the tech, which was fun, that was different, it's that intimacy of hearing a story and somebody telling you a story right there.
Yeah.
So when I wrote the
Hang
book,
tight for a second, David. I got to do a
a
station announcement. Yeah.
Sure, go right
everybody,
ahead.
thank you for tuning in today. You are listening to the Adam Messer Show, and I'm your host, Adam Messer. My special guest today is David Allen Voyles, and you are listening to us here on WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. So, David, question for you with storytelling. So a lot of folks, when they first start off, they don't feel like they're really good at writing or whatever, but they have a story idea.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, if I had a penny for every time somebody said, "Oh, I've got an idea for a story," and I'm like, "Hey, have you actually written anything?" I mean, like, I'm sure. What's the answer you hear most of the time?
Oh yeah, you mean the answer I give when I hear that? Or
No. When they say, "Hey, David, I've got this great story idea," and you're like, "Okay, cool, tell me about it," and then like you ask them like, "Hey, have you written anything on it yet?"
Oh, have you written anything? Oh yeah.
What's
yeah,
like 99% of the time I've
no, yeah.
they'll say,
right,
"No, I
maybe
haven't written
not.
anything. I just got an idea."
Yeah.
So what do you say, like, to folks that, what's a good way for them to get started as a writer?
Yeah, really, it's to sit down and do it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the
Actually do
that's
the
the thing.
writing.
Yeah, actually sit down and do the writing. I mean, every lots of people, as you're saying, as you're pointing out, have an idea, but sitting down and doing it. I mean, I started this publishing. I mean, started writing so that somebody else could read stuff when I was 65.
Wow,
You
that's
know, just
awesome.
last year. So it was at retirement. I mean, I would write little things, and I wrote with my students, and that was a real important thing to me, is to write with them and share things. When I would write an assignment, I'd often be writing the same things they were writing, and we'd share things, and or just even if it was just pieces of it. So I wrote things, and when did vocabulary, I wish I had these things. I would write stories that worked the words into it, but they were usually really zany, wacky, funny stories,
Yeah.
and so just that kind of thing. But I didn't ever publish, so it took that long. For me, I just couldn't multitask teaching with then the time to sit down and write. So it took until retirement really to be able to do that, even though I had that love. So that's the main advice, is to sit down and do it. Editing is so huge
Hmm.
and so hard. So you need somebody who is supportive, but at the same time is a good reader, who's good with language, and that can give you some good, honest feedback. I think those would be the two things: sit down and do it, and then have somebody who can help you in a positive way and critique it.
I love that. I had a professor one time that said writing is just rewriting. When you
Yeah.
like, and I know I can't remember who said this, but like the first draft is you telling yourself the story. And then when you go back and you revise it and you rewrite it, and I've been reading George Orwell's like it's a book, a collection of essays by him.
Uh-huh.
And I read this essay last night. It was politics in the English language, and he was criticizing political language that where people try to use big words to sound
Hmm.
intelligent or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And he was talking about how, like, in English, um, instead of using like English phrases, he brought up the example of like forget me nots as little flowers or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And he was talking about how that was the name of it, the original name of it, but that scientific names came along later on and they Latinized the names or whatever. And he was talking about, like, using simple, straightforward language, avoiding cliche
Hmm.
metaphors and things like that.
Right.
And
Right.
I feel that's important because when you're editing, or when someone else is editing it, um, you have to have a critical eye of it.
Yeah.
But I feel like you shouldn't be critical of it. You shouldn't put it down. It shouldn't be negative. You should just look at it from a perspective of, okay, is this the message that I want to relay in this story?
Yeah.
Does each word, each sentence, each paragraph, each chapter, does that move that story forward? And if it doesn't, if it's a distraction or whatever, and I'm not going to say that I'm the best writer in the world, because I'm not. I'm going to tell you that much. I know that. I'm definitely far from being George Orwell or Ernest Hemingway or anybody like that. But to think that's what I think of when I'm writing. I'm like, okay, well, is this am I moving the story forward? Am I and there's sometimes where I'll write just because I'm like stuck, and I'm just
Hmm.
writing just to write, and other
Yeah.
stuff comes from it. But yeah, I feel like it is important to make
Oh,
sure that
that's
you write
that's a
and
really
edit.
important point when writing. And I remember telling students this at one point. They would it because this was even for writing essays. It didn't have to be trying to write fiction. It was writing whatever.
Yeah.
And I'd see kids. I'd give them some time in class. We'd be writing in class essay or composition of some sort. And I'd see people, which is going to happen. You get stuck and you're just sitting there, and you go, I just can't think of what to put in this. Well, just write anything.
Yeah.
Write, I can't think of what to say. Write
Hmm.
that down. Get the pen and pen. At that point, of course, we were always doing pen and pencil.
Yeah.
Write, get it moving. And so I think the same thing has to happen if you sit and stare at a page. You can kind of blank yourself out, but go ahead and just keep writing, like keep the flow going, and then you can come back and, as you said, do some editing to it. Now, I don't always follow my same advice. It's really great to give that advice. That idea, I've heard this said so many times, maybe you have too, about, just write it all out first and don't worry about the grammar and don't worry about editing while you're writing. And I believe that's probably a best way to do things.
Oh yeah.
I cannot make myself, though, not correct something while I'm going. If I and I don't know. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to interfere. But I've heard people talk about the actual mechanical process of writing, and I'll correct and fix even as I'm going, instead of letting the flow go sometimes. But so far, so good. At least I think.
Yeah, I think everybody's got their own flow. Everybody's got their own way that works. And that actually, talking about that, sometimes when I'm in that mode, I'll get a notebook out and I'll just write in a notebook instead of on the computer, because you're going to misspell words, you're going to have grammar, punctuation, errors or whatever, and then if you go back and you type it up and you see like a pattern of like, oh, I always forget to put the comma after whatever. Like one that just blew my mind this year was them saying that irregardless was actually an acceptable form of regardless. I was like,
after all these years,
I was like, no, I'm not going to use irregardless.
Is not a word.
I mean, it's like I know ain't is not a word, an official word either, but like I'm not.
It's dialect, we're okay with that.
Yeah, I'm okay.
But I couldn't throw in irregardless the same way that I'd throw in ain't for a character. Well, maybe I would. But
yeah, I mean, like if it's dialogue and it's colloquial or whatever, I'm okay with that. But like that's just a hang up for me. But I mean, the nice thing about this, like going back to that essay, was Orwell was talking about that language, like especially the English language, with the Saxon background. And it does have a Latin background too, but with that background, that the language should be a living language. It should be able to change, and like the English that we speak today is definitely different than the English they spoke 700 or 800 years ago.
Oh yeah, it's even unrecognizable.
Yeah,
really
yeah.
That's right. And
I feel,
it should be. Language is dynamic. That's exactly right. And it should be. If it was static, it would be awful. And styles are really a factor too. I mean, we think about students today actually reading Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, reading H.P. Lovecraft, reading some of the more like those are different times and period, but they both have very different styles, and they're both somewhat antiquated compared to what modern literature is.
Yeah.
And I don't think, and many students don't have the patience for that anymore. So how to teach an appreciation for that? I don't know if you really can. You can get the gist of the story, and kids will fall in love with Poe because of the ideas, and they like the weirdness of Lovecraft, so they'll do that. But the language is sometimes an interesting obstacle. But I had to play with it. I had to do one story in Tales from the Hearse in that older style. I wanted the time period to be turn of the century, like into the 1900s, from the 1800s, here in the mountains of North Carolina. And I wanted the style of the speech to reflect that. And I've never been sure whether people appreciate that idea of, using a different language, how people speak, that their language is more formal. And I'd like to get some feedback ultimately from folks about that, because the other stories, there's a range. There are different characters. I like to speak in different voices. I still think I have overall a general style.
Mm-hmm.
But using that technique, but like not only words are dynamic and change over time, but style changes over time.
Oh yeah. I mean, tastes change. People, things, flavors change. I mean, if you look at journalism, for example, or if you look at like old movies, the way that they spoke, versus today. I mean, that Southern drawl today is different than the fake Southern drawl that they had, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
It evolves to like what people think that it should sound like, even though it's not anything close to it, to reality sometimes. And sometimes it's actually a mirror of reality. And so,
Yeah. I think it should be doing that. So it is an interesting thing. But I like kind of what you were saying about Orwell too, just wanting to get language, its purpose, keep in mind its purpose as you're writing is to communicate. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to impress with your writing, I mean, poetry is a great place for that.
Yeah.
And yet there can be wonderful opportunities for passages in narrative fiction that are beautiful. But if you're trying to impress with vocabulary, I think you're going to get bogged down.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think
the point is definitely to communicate.
You miss the message a lot of times if you're only focusing on trying to, like you said, impress somebody or,
Yeah.
flatter somebody or whatever. It just doesn't come across as sincere to me.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
insincere. And I would much rather read something that I feel like is being genuine than something that I can't, I so like this last week or so, and we've got a few minutes before the break here, but this last week, a friend of mine had shared a Ray Bradbury, like those old school black and white, Life of the Day of type thing that you'd play at a school,
Yeah.
and it was like Life of the Day of a writer of Ray Bradbury, and I watched that. And it was I think it was filmed like in either the late 50s or early 60s, but it's in black and white.
Oh, that's neat.
He had they walked through the day in the life of his, whatever, and he actually had in his house, he had a writing room in the basement, and across from his typewriter was this sign that says "Don't think." And the only thing I've ever read of Ray Bradbury until this week was the compulsory Fahrenheit 451. Everybody reads that in like ninth grade or whatever, or at least they did when I was a kid. And that's the only thing I ever read of his. And I watched this video, and when I saw that "Don't think," I was like, this guy is human just like me. Because, as a writer, we tend to overthink. I know I overthink things. Well, at the end of the video, there was this lecture that he did from like 2001. I believe he passed away in 2002, but it was this lecture that he did in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about, writing. He said, if you want to be a better writer, he said, read a poem, read an essay, and read a short story a night, and learn metaphors. Learn metaphors. And so I was like, you know what? I'm actually on day 7 of doing that. And I've been reading Shakespeare again, because I really haven't read it much since high school. I actually I've read a few here and there, but not much. I read some essays by George Bernard Shaw this week, and then I picked up this George Orwell book on essays, and then I picked up a Ray Bradbury collection of 100 of Ray Bradbury's best short stories. And I've been reading those.
That's great.
And the thing that I really enjoyed about that with Ray Bradbury was, first of all, I'd never really read anything besides Fahrenheit 451. But I listened to that entire lecture, and he was talking about writing, and he was talking about, the audience. And so I've been reading these short stories, and I can tell you, his short stories always leave you with a question of like, what happened? The ones that I've read so far. Like there's a short story called The Pedestrian, which was the precursor to Fahrenheit 451. And this is what he says, in this lecture. And then the crazy thing about it was, in the lecture, like the stuff that he was talking about, he actually recapped in the forward for this compilation, because the compilation came out in 2002. So I think he must have been thinking about this compilation when he was doing this lecture, because a lot of the stuff mirrored itself. And it was so fascinating to me.
He was really something else. I know you got break coming up. I'll try to sum up this idea real quickly. He was a phenomenal figure, and you fall in love with it, or you can hate it. I mean, some people don't like his style. It's a very specific style. But it's remarkable talent and remarkable skill for what you were just talking about, the language itself. Real quickly, there was authors have just made a kind of a homage to him in a book, a collection of stories written in his style.
Oh, wow.
And they commented on a story that they would write it, trying to write as Bradbury would write, and an idea that he might have enjoyed, and wrote about him. And there were one or two writers in there, I wish I could remember who they were, who wrote to him when they were just beginning. They were like teenagers or younger even, and he would write back. He encouraged them as writers, throughout their lives, or for a decade or more, which I found just totally remarkable about the guy. He was really something special.
I agree. All right, we're going to do the station IDs, everybody, and then we're going to come back and talk some more. I actually want to talk a little bit more about Ray Bradbury, and then we'll get back into talking about Tales from the Hearse. So,
very good.
All right.
Georgia State Department of Public Health. Social distancing means minimizing contact with people. It also means that if you are near someone in public, try to stay at least 6 feet away. The less contact people have with one another means the less opportunity for the virus to spread. Slowing the spread of the virus means that we can keep our healthcare system from becoming overwhelmed. More information can be found at dph.georgia.gov. Did you know that holes left behind at the beach are hazardous for baby sea turtles as they make their way to the ocean? Baby sea turtles are protected by filling in the holes that you or others dig on the beach. Hashtag Sea Turtle Safety Stickers and more information can be found at www.seaturtlesafety.org.
Thank you for listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
All right, everybody. So we were talking right before the break. We were talking about Ray Bradbury and writing, and one of the things I enjoyed. This is I feel like this has been the right time in my life for me to rediscover Ray Bradbury. Listening to that lecture this week, and I say lecture, but it's just it was a talk. But he, come to find out, he was a guy. He would go around and he would do all these different lectures for colleges and whatever. And he graduated from high school, never went to college, but he talked about like he earned his degree in the library. Like he spent 10 years or so in the library, reading and whatever. And he had a job, and some of the stuff that he said really resonated with me. And he had a job selling newspapers on a corner. And he would sell, I think, newspapers and magazines and that kind of stuff. And people would come by and they say, "Well, what are you doing?" He's like, "I'm a writer." And they were like, "Well, you don't look like it," And this is back in the 50s or whatever, or the 40s or whatever. And he was, right. He was making like $10 a week, and and he was talking about this. He had a wife and kids and a family, and just a regular family person, just a regular guy, and he was trying to make it. And he never was a novelist. He didn't call himself a novelist, but he was like a short story writer. And he was talking about how the Martian Chronicles came together. That a friend of his suggested to him, if you're going to really do this, you've got to go to New York and you've got to get in front of these literary agents. And so he did this trip to New York, met with an agent, and they were talking about his short stories, the Martian Chronicles. And the guy was like, "Well, have you ever thought about putting this together?" Right? And so he sold his first story for like $750, which was a ton of money back then.
Yeah.
And then within a few minutes, the guy was like, "Okay, do you have any other story ideas?" And he had this other story idea, and he sold the second story idea for $750. And $1,500 when he was making $10 a week. $1,500, and he needed to buy a car and all this stuff. And he was talking about just storytelling. And so I've been following along with it. I've been doing the reading the essay, and I've been reading the short story and the poem a night, and it's been fun. It's been fun.
Yeah.
I feel like it's I'm just trying something different.
Well, I think that's probably really good advice that you got from Ray Bradbury there.
Bill Cooper just came in the studio, everybody.
Hey there.
He said, "Hey, man."
Up next.
I was listening coming in, and years ago, I'll tell you how long ago it was, Truman Capote was on a night show.
Bill Cooper's one of our guests, actually one of our hosts, David.
Yes, I wonder if he might be up next.
So what were you saying, Bill?
Okay, so Truman Capote was on one of the late shows. I forget which one. Anyhow, he was asked the straight question, just as you two were talking about, how do you write? And he just said, just do it.
Yeah.
And that's all he said. Just do it. Don't, ask yourself how. Sit down, pick up a pen back then, and
start
write. And you had said, a lot of people gave you good ideas, but they don't write.
Yeah.
And that was the advice from someone that wrote one of the best books I ever read, In Cold Blood. It was
In Cold Blood,
incredible book. And when they did the movie, it was an incredible movie. When they did the remake, it was incredible because they stuck exactly to the book.
Nice.
And it was, anyway, so that was his advice from Truman Capote, who was top of his game.
It makes me wonder, like, back in the day with Shakespeare, if, like, people were like, Bill, I've got an idea for a play. I wonder how many people went up to Shakespeare like, it'd be great if you wrote about this.
The only thing is back then a lot of people couldn't write or read, so it's a different era.
Yeah.
But they
So
would
you
have
were king of the
ideas.
hill if you could read and write.
Yeah, because he was talking, like, I know Shakespeare had this one where he would talk about the groundlings, and he was talking about the audience,
Yeah.
and he called them the groundlings.
The groundlings, yes, all those right there.
Oh,
in
we
the
all
front
have a
were-
secret code. For,
paid for the cheap seats there that weren't even seats.
Yeah. They're the ones that had the rotten produce and would throw it at
Right?
the actors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
it
right.
kept you on your toes, didn't it?
Yeah, could you imagine? You're like, man, I worked for 5 years and I got paid 2 pence.
Yeah.
And that 2 pence would be like 3 weeks worth of wages or something,
Cabbage.
crazy.
3 weeks worth of cabbage.
So David, tell me more about like you said that you got into publishing your works this last year or so. What's that journey been like?
It's been definitely hard, and I feel like maybe on the edge of things coming open because there's another creative outlet for me that has just been kind of fun to work with, and it seems like it might work well, but also get a little bit more attention, and that is doing a podcast.
Oh yeah, I could talk to you about that. I
Yeah,
don't know if
not
you've
a-
already
not
started
a-
it or not,
yeah.
but you did send me
Actually,
a
I
link to
have.
it. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to listen to it.
But it's not a talk podcast. You say podcast, and I think 90% of people think about talk shows. They think
Yeah.
about bringing in guests, and that's because what probably a large percentage of them are. But the podcast that I've got is the type for telling stories.
A
And,
monologue, it's a storytelling, yeah.
yeah, and so I actually did 2 seasons. I did a season of 13 stories, and now I'm doing the second, and involved in the second season of it now. First season was just individual standalone stories.
What's your show called?
Dark Corners.
Dark Corners, and where's it available?
Yeah, it's on most of your apps. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Libsyn. It's on. I can't think. I
Do
think
you host
if
it through
just-
Libsyn?
Yeah.
See, that's what I use. And I'll tell you something I did that I don't know if you're thinking about this or if you've already done it, but like the AdamMesserShow.com. I don't know why I didn't do this before, but I got the URL, the AdamMesserShow.com, and Libsyn has a feature for a couple of bucks a month that you can direct your URL directly to your Libsyn page, right?
Oh, that's cool.
And the name servers or whatever. So I just use Google domains. I got the domain name, and so like the AdamMesserShow.com goes directly to my Libsyn page. Now I had one before for Savannah Muses because the show used to be called Muses, Memoirs, and More until
Right.
I updated it to the Adam Messer Show, and SavannahMuses.com goes directly to my Apple Podcasts. And so,
Oh,
like
that's cool.
what I found was Libsyn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify are like my top 3.
Yeah.
Because I was using Anchor FM before, and those were the top 3. So I was like, okay. The reason why I went with Libsyn was because I wanted to have control over my RSS feed. But I don't know if that's something that you've done already. Had like a
No, I don't think so. And actually, Jason Stokes he's as I said, he's the
okay.
helper from Gestalt Media. So
Okay.
he hooked it all up, and
Nice.
he's been actually getting that going. But we don't have it linked, to my knowledge, certainly not to a .com. I mean,
Well, see
that's-
that I think that's
idea.
a great way because for me, I just had this idea last week. I was like, I got a bunch of different URLs or whatever, but I was like, I don't have the AdamMesserShow.com. Why don't I have my own showname.com? And I was like, this is a no-brainer. Here I am, like overlooking a total gem, and it just happened to happen. And I was looking at Libsyn, and Libsyn, you can have it directly linked for the name host servers. So it goes like when it says the AdamMesserShow.com, it doesn't have like, it doesn't redirect it like, most of the time when you do a redirect, it just says the Adam Messer Show and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it makes perfect sense. So that would be great. And what
That's
I
a
feel
great
like,
tip.
what you're
great
talking
tip.
about is I did something similar last year when I had my story published, with Rachel Brune's Chrome Girls Press anthology, Stories We Tell After Midnight. It was called Wrong Turn. And what I did was I produced an audiobook. I hired a voice actor, Alidria Hurt, and she narrated my book. So it sounds like what you've got is you got a show with basically a bunch of audiobooks, audio versions of your stories.
With a little bit of a plus to it. Some of the stories are stories that were actually in these two collections that I've already published. But like I said, the second season is totally new. And
nice.
I got hooked up with a dark ambient music like soundtrack music to horror films. There are people.
Nice.
There's a whole thing on Bandcamp, if you look for it in other places, of ambient music, and they make albums, and it's just, and a lot of them, especially with the dark stuff, is just really cool. And I hooked up with this guy, Mambi Ullman, who's in Cary, North Carolina, a wonderful musician and just a really good person. And we clicked, and we've been collaborating ever since. But I used his existing music for background. There are sound effects, so it's really like a radio show. Like when you heard the old radio
serials,
yeah. So you hear my narration, but you also hear music, and you hear the clump of the whatever it is, or
sound
the door
effects
shutting
and all
or whatever.
that. Yeah.
So sound effects, and now we're doing those were standalone stories. This time I took one of his existing Halloween themed music albums. It doesn't have any talking on it. It's just very, very dark stuff. But it had 13 tracks. I said, well, I'm going to take this work called Witch Works, and he has soundtracks for he's like a movie plot in his mind when he's doing them, but there's no lyrics. It's just the music.
Right.
So I took his music album and I wrote out an outline for 13 chapters, 13 episodes of the story of Witch Works. And I took his ideas. He took a little bit more than what he had written. He had like a little paragraph that goes into these CDs and things that he puts out. They're wonderful. And it was just a skeletal outline, really. And I took that and expanded it. And so every 2 weeks, there's a new episode that comes out, and it'll finish the week of October. the week of Halloween.
Yeah.
So right before Halloween, we get the 12th and 13th episodes together. Actually, will happen on that week. But it's a really cool story, and it's got this wonderful music and ambient background. That's fantastic. So that's what Dark Corners is. And
that's cool.
So there may be another Dark Corners, but there's only one. There's Dark Corners with David Allen Voyles. That's
cool.
Complete name of it.
All right, everybody, you are listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And speaking of music, Sebastian, would you mind playing some more live music for us? Awesome. Thank you, Sebastian. Okay, David, so do you have any shout outs you would like to do for somebody out there?
Well, definitely. I always shout out to my wife and son who've been incredibly supportive through this whole time, because I kind of dedicated the second book to them, to Ann and Josh for putting up with the ghost in the loft, because that's my office up there where I write. So
nice. The ghost in the loft.
Also, Jason and Anna Ray Stokes at Gestalt Media, they are really making it work. I think I might have, even though it's really only been a year, it's hard. And you just really do start to do the self-doubting,
Mm-hmm.
After a point you go, I don't know whether I can do this or not. I don't know whether I'm getting through. I don't know, maybe my stuff, stinks. Maybe I'm just not with it. This isn't what people want to hear. It's all those doubts come in. And so having somebody who can still encourage you and do the things like you were talking about that I don't have the background for links to get the word out there so that people can hopefully find you, they're tremendous. So yeah, shout out to Gestalt Media as well.
Yeah, I think that's a topic that comes up quite a bit, David. I love the fact that you talk about that, because none of us are perfect, and I feel I feel a lot of times, especially with authors and creators or whatever, if you're going into the idea of like wanting to sell books, for example, I just want to talk about selling books. If you go into the idea of wanting to sell books, Amazon, for example, has, they publish 7,000 books a day, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an incredibly staggering number of books that are put out every day, and so I feel like it's a feat just to break into like the top 100, or the top 10 or whatever. And, and it's all like their algorithm. It's all based off of sales. Sometimes it's not even like, you don't have to have a ton of sales, but it's just, depends on how it goes or whatever, and reviews and all that stuff. And I was talking, I've talked to a lot of different people, but I feel like when it comes to that, when it comes to like the whole production side of it, there's the storytelling side, which it should be all about the story when you're making the book, when you're writing the book and you're producing it and editing it and all that stuff. And, you're going to get to a point where it's like, oh, I could fiddle with this until eternity, but I need to, it's got to get done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like in the last hour, one of the questions I always like to ask and is like, what's better than perfect? Done. And the procrastination side of, waiting and whatever, it's hard sometimes to get over that hurdle. But the self-doubt, I believe everybody has that. And I also like the idea, because I'm listening to this story called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And one of the things that she talks about in that book is also the idea, it's not arrogance, but it's the right to be here. It's like, I have the right to be here. I'm not entitlement in the sense of like, oh, I deserve this. More of like, oh, you know what? I should be here, and this is what I should be doing. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And you have to have some of that, air of confidence to really believe in yourself. When things are kind of flat and kind of stale, or when, like, honestly, I haven't sold any of my books this last month. I'm in a group where people make $100,000 a month making indie sales. And I'm like, man, I would be so happy if I just did, $1,000 a month or something like that,
Yeah.
And I see stuff like that. And, and I don't like to compare myself to other people, but when I see other people and I see like what they're putting out,
Yeah.
I'm like, I feel like my stuff's better than theirs.
Yeah, I understand how you feel. Yeah, I
not that I'm better than them, but I mean, like their storytelling is not, I feel like what I've got, but they're obviously doing a better job than me at other things. Yeah. So,
Right.
I try to learn and I try to, move forward, and I'm never going to give up on it. I'm never, I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm going to adapt. I'm going to change. I'm going to do different things and whatever. But that I feel everybody has that. Even, like I was talking to Mary Kay Andrews earlier this year, and she had a new book that released during this, this pandemic. And she usually releases a book a year, and they have a big release party, and it's, like a very special event they do here in town. It's a fundraiser, and, they couldn't do it this year.
Yep.
You
Yeah,
know?
right. That's same thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've experienced that. It's tough. You couldn't do any readings. The bookstore, the independent bookstore in town
Yeah.
that's very well established and invites the local readers in to do things. Nope, couldn't do that.
Well, one of the things that Mary
so-
Kay said, which really struck me, because she's been a New York Times bestselling author. She's been doing this for a long time and has been a bestselling author for a long time. She has an avid reader following. She said that she still feels like they're going to knock on the door and ask for the check back.
Wow.
And I was
Yeah,
thinking to
that's
myself, I was
amazing.
like, here, an established author like Mary Kay, who has, great following, she has, obviously she's doing what we want to do,
Yeah.
If she feels like that, I'm not so abnormal to, feel like, oh man.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a little comforting in a way to share that misery, I guess, to some extent, to know that even those folks are having some of those kind of same feelings. Because, yeah, it has been tough, and it's even tougher. Well, I don't know. This has definitely been a tough year.
Yeah,
for
it has. It
everybody
has.
in so many different ways.
Mhm.
I'm fortunate in that I'm a retired teacher and I'm a retired state employee, and I have something to fall back on. But there's so many people around me that are suffering worse than I am, so I have to kind of remind myself of that too.
Yeah. And, creatively, I think if we're not challenging ourselves and are pushing ourselves and, if we don't have a little disdain with our work, there's something wrong there too, because it's like, oh, I could have done better on this. There's got to be some kind of critical, viewpoint of
Yeah,
it.
you do. You do have to do that. But then, like you said, there was something that really struck a chord with me is about the one thing better than perfect is done.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we would never finish.
Right.
I mean, you never look at it as done. You go like, oh, if you go back and read it again, you go, no, I could still do this to it. But sometimes it's just good to, close that thing up and say, no, it's done, and a deadline can help you with that.
Yeah, and tell the characters to stop nagging and like hey, you know what, we're moving on from this scene. We're done. Like it's kind of crazy, but sometimes I have to do that. I'm like, oh no, I know you want to do this, but I'm done. The discussion is closed.
Yeah,
so I have to move on.
Funny, but yeah, I can
So-
definitely relate.
So we got a few minutes left here. Where can people find your writing?
Right. Well, I
books.
would love for them to find me at Gestalt Media, because then it's helping not only me at a little bit better rate than Amazon will do, but it's helping other indie authors, the small group that we've got there. So gestaltmedia.com.
And how do you spell
Amazon,
Gestalt Media?
Gestalt, Gestalt, kind of like the German.
Yeah.
It is the German word, and media.
Yeah.
And it's on as URL. It's gestalt-media.com.
Okay, yeah, that's why I want to make sure because and there'll be a link in the podcast later on.
And I'm available. I mean, I can be found on Amazon and Barnes and Noble as well. But it just
It's
always
under
nice if you
David
can.
Allen,
David Allen
Allen.
Voyles,
Yeah.
Allen.
And Voyles is Voyles.
That's correct.
Yeah, because my last name is Messer, and I'm always having to like it sounds funny, but I'm always having to tell people like it's mess with an So
Get the whole mess in.
yeah, get it all messed up. But yeah, I really appreciate you being on the show today, David.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. So you got this new series that you're working on
Yep.
that's being okay. So are you releasing a
definitely
new
people should
episode
find
each
that
week
out.
until October
Every
31st?
every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks.
So
Okay.
this coming, they always go out just midnight on Tuesday nights when
Okay.
they do it. So this coming Tuesday night, episode 6 of Witchworks is coming out. The podcast is called Dark Corners.
Dark Corners.
Or
Okay.
Dark Corners with David Allen Voyles.
Okay. Great.
You can find it when you put Dark Corners in, especially if you remember to put Dark Corners and Witchworks. Google will pull it right up.
Yeah, and I'll have a link in the podcast too. So
Okay, cool. That's wonderful.
Well, thank you
That's
so
great. I
much,
think
David,
people
for
really
being
love
on
it.
the show today. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun, Adam.
All right, everybody.